So I came across a video the other day that was talking about how to raise testosterone naturally. So I thought, that's interesting. Let me take a look at it. Now, this video was done by a medical physician. He's considered to be sort of a men's health kind of guy, and he's got over 1 million subscribers. So I took a look at his video. His number one recommendation was to eat more cholesterol to raise testosterone. Now, I've heard that before, maybe once. So I thought, that's interesting. Let's take a look at that. Let me look at that and see whether that makes any sense and whether there's any research to support it, because you certainly don't want to be eating more cholesterol and more saturated fat if it's not going to be beneficial. So let's take a look at the research first. So here's the research on eating cholesterol to raise testosterone. Oh, I'm sorry. There is none. There is zero research on eating cholesterol to raise testosterone. I couldn't find any. If anyone out there, any viewers, can find a published study that shows that eating more cholesterol raises testosterone, please leave it in the comments below, because maybe I missed something, but I did a pretty thorough search. I couldn't find a single study that showed that eating cholesterol raises your testosterone levels. Now, I've been doing natural medicine for 25 years, and there's not research on everything. So just because there's not research on something doesn't mean it's not true. It doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense. Sometimes there's not a lot of funding for things and, for different types of treatments. So you have to look at, the premise or the logic or rationale behind something. So let's look at what is the theoretical premise behind eating cholesterol to raise testosterone. This diagram is demonstrating the biosynthesis of steroid hormones, including testosterone. So any hormone that comes from cholesterol is defined as a steroid hormone. So aldosterone, cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, progesterone. Vitamin D is not on this diagram, but vitamin D is also a steroid hormone because it comes from cholesterol. So the idea is that because testosterone is produced through a series of biochemical reactions from cholesterol, that if you increase your cholesterol consumption, it will drive this reaction or these reactions and end up with higher testosterone production. So let's look at this first. The idea that that would happen is a little bit flawed because cholesterol can be converted from pregnenolone and go via a number of different pathways. So it can either go to progesterone and ultimately to aldosterone, or it can go via this biochemical pathway and end up with cortisol production, or go down this pathway and end up with either testosterone or estrogen or DHT. So there's a lot of different pathways that control what happens and why different hormones are produced. But the idea that you can just simply focus on cholesterol and that it's going to end up raising only testosterone, but none of these other steroid hormones is not likely. In fact, it just doesn't happen. But let's say that that could happen. Do we have any other examples of whether something upstream from testosterone can increase testosterone production? And we do. We have androstenedione. So androstenedione is the immediate prohormone precursor to testosterone. So if the idea is that you can increase a substrate in the biochemical pathway of testosterone and thereby increasing testosterone, it would make the most sense that the most immediate prohormone or precursor, which in this case is androstenedione, would be the most likely to increase in testosterone production because it has nowhere to go but to testosterone. The problem with cholesterol is cholesterol could go down this pathway or this pathway. It doesn't necessarily have to go to testosterone. So the best example of whether you can increase a substrate or precursor to testosterone, whether that actually can increase testosterone, would be the case of androstenedione. So are there any reasons or do we have any knowledge about androstenedione? And we do. We have Mark McGwire. Mark McGwire played Major League Baseball, and in 1998, he hit the most home runs in one single season. It was 70 home runs he hit in a single season. Now, I bring up Mark McGwire because, this was 1998, and at the time, there was some suggestion that maybe he was using some performance enhancing type drugs like anabolic steroids. So, his response to that is that no, he wasn't taking anabolic steroids. He was actually using androstenedione. So androstenedione, for those of you old enough or who were, weightlifting in the 90s, androstenedione was a pro-hormone that was over the counter. You could buy it as a supplement, and it was sold as a product that was supposed to help raise your testosterone levels and give you more muscle mass and all of these beneficial effects based on the fact that it could convert into testosterone. So that was the idea. So did it in fact deliver on that? Let's take a look at it. It's 1998, and Mark McGwire's on his way to a record-breaking 70 home runs in a single season. And you can see here, this article's talking about androstenedione. And, like I said, there was a lot of question at the time. Here, some reporter decided to bring up a topic that already hadn't been beaten to death, the issue of nutritional supplements. And McGwire innocently confirmed he took a little-known over-the-counter power source named androstenedione. So I was working out at World's Gym in Chicago at the time, and I had some weightlifting buddies of mine that were taking androstenedione, and they swore by it. They were like, yeah, I've got so much stronger, and I put on muscle mass and gained weight. So, they were convinced that androstenedione was the end all to for bodybuilders and weightlifters and things. But the question is, it became popular at the time, and as often is the case, there ends up being some research on it. So let's take a look and see if there's any research on androstenedione and whether it actually increases testosterone. Here is the only study that I could find that looked at androstenedione, and this is a pretty decent study. It's it's a controlled study. It's randomized, so they had a control group. So they had a number of men, age 19 to 29 that were taking, one group of them were taking androstenedione and the other group was not, and neither group, they were randomized, so neither group knew what they were taking to try to eliminate any sort of placebo effect or bias. And the outcome was that androstenedione supplementation did not increase serum testosterone, nor did it enhance any skeletal muscle adaptations, which means it didn't cause any muscle growth. So androstenedione did not raise testosterone and did not cause any muscle effect. What they did find in this study was that serum estrogen concentration was higher in the androstenedione group. So what does androstenedione supplementation do? It does not raise testosterone, but raises estrogen. Interesting. So why would that be? The reason is relatively straightforward. Here's androstenedione. So if you supplement and increase this pro-hormone, it doesn't really have anywhere to go but to testosterone. But the problem is that testosterone can also be converted into estrogen or into dihydrotestosterone. And whether this happens or not, or how this happens, depends on a number of different things, including your testosterone level. This diagram demonstrates the control of testosterone production. So, here we have testosterone down in the lower right. It's produced in the Leydig cells in the testis, and it's under the control of the brain, under the hypothalamic control, and then also the anterior pituitary. So as testosterone production goes up, there's a reason there's a line drawn here to the hypothalamus as well as the pituitary gland, is that testosterone itself will inhibit hypothalamic functioning and pituitary functioning with regard to hormone production, or at least testosterone production. So as testosterone levels go up, that inhibits the release of gonadotropic releasing hormone, which causes the pituitary to release less LH, or luteinizing hormone. LH is what stimulates the Leydig cells to produce testosterone. So this all makes sense. This is a very sensitive balancing mechanism that you have, not just for testosterone, but all hormones, whether it's the thyroid or the adrenal glands or the testes. There's very sensitive feedback mechanisms so that you end up having the proper amount of hormones, of neurotransmitters, of any sort of enzyme or product in the body. It has to be regulated. So this is how it's regulated. So if testosterone is low, that ends up being sensed by the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. It increases. So the brain says, hey, we're low on testosterone. We need more testosterone. LH levels go up. and then testosterone would normally end up going up. And then as testosterone goes too high, then the brain says, hey, it's a little bit too high, we need to decrease production, and then testosterone goes down. So the reason why in the study on androstenedione, when they pushed testosterone production by increasing its precursor, androstenedione, what happened was testosterone probably initially started to go up, but what would happen would be the brain would sense that and say, well, we don't need any more testosterone production. So, a couple things would happen. First of all, LH production would go down and your testosterone production would ultimately go down. But what would also happen would be that you would have more conversion of testosterone to estrogen, which is what happened in that study. And that makes sense because normally estrogen is going to be, on the lower side in men. So if you start getting too much testosterone, some of that testosterone is going to end up being converted directly into estrogen. I'll do another video on how to raise testosterone levels and why men who have low testosterone often have high estrogen. In fact, high estrogen will suppress this whole mechanism too. So when estrogen goes high, estrogen also will be sensed by the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and high estrogen will shut down testosterone production. So in future video, I'll talk about who that applies to and what to do when estrogen levels tend to be high and how to raise testosterone naturally. So let's take another look at what happens when you raise androstenedione. So when you raise androstenedione, you end up ultimately increasing estrogen. So if androstenedione doesn't work to raise it, why would you think that raising cholesterol way upstream, so a number of biochemical reactions occur before cholesterol ever gets to testosterone, why would you think that that's a rational premise? Why would you think that raising cholesterol is ultimately going to raise testosterone and not raise anything else? It's not. That just doesn't make any sense. So there's no research showing eating cholesterol raises testosterone. It just simply doesn't make sense. The available research that is similar or would provide some insight into that shows that it doesn't work either. So there's no research that shows that eating cholesterol raises testosterone. The theoretical premise is invalid. The question is there any other research, like other animal studies that would give us some insight into whether eating cholesterol would raise testosterone? So there were no, human trials demonstrating cholesterol consumption will raise testosterone, but are there any animal studies? I was in fact able to find several animal studies that looked at high cholesterol intake and testosterone or testicular function. So, when you can't find human studies, then the next thing you look at is, are there any animal studies that might provide some insight? And then if there's no animal studies, well, then you start looking at in vitro studies where you might be in a laboratory studying the effect of different substances on cells, which is probably the least insightful sort of research there is. So here's some animal studies. So this was studied in rats, and they found impaired testicular function in rats when they had a diet-induced hypercholesterolemia. So what they did was they took these rats and they fed them a high cholesterol diet, and what the researchers found was that hypercholesterolemia is an independent risk factor for testicular dysfunction and resulting low testosterone levels, so it lowered serum testosterone. This study, which was actually done in, this one was in rats again, and they gave them again a high cholesterol diet, and they found it inhibited testosterone synthesis. So, and they found that the longer they were eating a high cholesterol diet, so it was time dependent, the longer they were eating the diet, the lower the testosterone levels went. So their conclusion were the findings suggested that a high dietary cholesterol intake decreased testosterone levels by downregulating steroidogenic enzymes and things. So they looked at why it actually happened. But end of the day, high cholesterol diet, lower testosterone. The last one we have here is another one that was done in mice, found that diet-induced hypercholesterolemia impaired testicular steroid production, and their conclusion was a significant decrease in serum circulating levels of testosterone after they induced hypercholesterolemia through diet. So there you have it. Eating a high cholesterol diet, if anything, probably lowers testosterone levels. I think it's kind of interesting. In defense of this this medical physician that made that recommendation, he had other recommendations in that same video that were reasonable. Like fasting and high intensity, training, interval training, which that makes sense. Losing weight makes sense. But eating a high cholesterol diet absolutely makes no sense. Now, this physician is, he's a paleo advocate and a keto type advocate and a low carb sort of guy. So it makes sense that he would make the recommendation, because the very diet that he's supporting is one that is high cholesterol and often high saturated fat. So at the end of the day, not a good idea. Don't eat cholesterol to raise your testosterone. I'm going to do a future video on ways to increase testosterone naturally, safe, effective ways to raise testosterone. So please subscribe to my channel, and if you like this video, click the like button.